Many thanks to Mega Audio for providing this unit on loan for the purpose of this review. I've no financial incentive for this review, so you can be sure it's a little bit less biased than usual. For those of you who have been sitting under a big rock in a cave on the moon the past 50 years, Fostex has a long history of producing some very good planar magnetic and planar studio headphones, starting with the T50 in 1974. Here is an OEM of the T50, the NAD RP18, which is fundamentally the same headphone. Over 10 years later, in 1988, the first of the RP series was released. Here's an example of the T50RP, the first series with the iconic squared outer cups. The T50RP still used the old round drivers like the original T20. After a long break, it wasn't until the arrival of the T50RP Mark II in around 2010 that Fostex started using rectangular planar drivers with zigzag style diaphragm traces. The T50RP K4G uses an updated version of the driver with a tighter array and increased number of magnets that are marketed as producing an improved faster response over the older version. To immediately address the elephant in the room, the T50RP K4G is exactly the same headphone as the regular T50RP Mark IV and even arrives in the same packaging. As far as I can see, the only big change from the Mark III to the Mark IV is the change of the socket position from the side of the cup to the bottom, and the addition of another socket on the right side, making these headphones perfectly symmetrical. Cosmetically, Fostex has entirely dropped the orange and white accents, going for a stealthy black and grey design, including a slightly updated logo design. The cables going over the headband are now fabric sheathed instead of just rubber, and there are some small quality of life upgrades like user-facing left and right indicators. Ergonomics haven't improved at all, with the headband padding continuing to bring a hot spot on the top of my head after around 30 minutes or so, although this is something that can be improved with modifications. More on that later. Let's start with the G, or gaming designation. Fostex is now making a marketing push in the gaming direction, and with good reason. In Japan, there has recently been something of a revival of the T50RP Mark IV sales, as gamers have taken notice of their extremely fast, clear transients, and more critically, their pinpoint imaging, both of which, in the world of competitive 3D gaming, is of the highest priority. Unfortunately, while the T50RP Mark IV excels in those regards, which is something I've also come to appreciate from other modern Fostex headphones I've reviewed in the past, it fails quite spectacularly at tonal accuracy, staging, and musicality. Firstly, this unit has channel imbalance in the bass, which is mildly concerning. The left channel has an almost linear response, while the right channel has a more of a mid-bass hump with more roll-off. While performing tone sweeps, the right channel does appear louder, but the left driver continues to move at lower sub-bass frequencies. The good news is that neither sounds subjectively bad, but it's possible that others may end up with more linear and bass lighter sounding units, and others may have bassier units with less sub-bass rumble and texture. Looking at the graph, which in this case is actually fairly accurate, it's clear that there is too much energy in the mid-range between 300 and 2000 Hz that makes all music sound too glaringly mid-range forward. The dip at 4 kHz is a mini DSP ears artifact that can be largely ignored. The peak at 8 kHz, however, is unfortunately quite present, although in reality, to my ears, it appears closer to 9.5 kHz when performing manual tone sweeps. The resulting timbre is very fast, dry, and stale. It's kind of like listening to music in a dead room with too much acoustic treatment, no interaction with the real world, and the result is something soulless, bass light, and slightly piercing up top. It has the ability to throw detail and transients for days, which is perfect for gaming, but is anything but a pleasant musical experience. Anyone that buys a Fostex T50RP headphone immediately rips off the stock pads and puts on aftermarket pads. It's a certainty, like the changing of the tides and the phases of the moon. I've been modifying T50RP headphones since the Mark II era, shortly after the Mr. Speaker's Mad Dog phase, so I've already accepted this as universal truth. After rolling just a few pads, I very quickly landed on the pad I already knew would be the best one in my current collection. All you need to know is that these pads are fundamentally the same as the ZMF Ori sheepskin pads. They've worked very well on all previous T50RP variants, and as expected, the Mark IV is no exception. Going back to the ergonomics, these deep, plushy pads do wonders for the comfort, immediately taking most of the weight off the top of my head and distributing it between my ears, turning them into headphones I can wear for hours without discomfort. The measurable differences show obvious improvements overall. The treble peak is reduced. The mid-range peak is more linear. The dip at 4 kHz is mostly cleared up, and the bass is overall bassier, although the deviation between left and right channels is even greater than before. Looking at graph averages, the T50RP is now much closer to my personal reference neutral, represented here by my modified Hi-Fi Man HE500. Not only that, but the subjective musical performance has not only improved, but is now somewhat enjoyable. Soundstage is much wider and more spacious, imaging has not taken a big hit in accuracy, and timbre has evened out a lot to something much closer to realistic. Bass lacks the sub-bass punch and texture you might expect from larger planars. Even with different pads, it has good thump and remains fairly neutral almost all the way down to 10 Hz, but ultimately lacks sub-bass rumble and impact, especially the kind you expect from closed-back headphones. Overall, I'd say it's more linear, but less impactful and textured than, let's say, a biodynamic DT770. Mids have become more balanced and don't have any obvious severe problems, although they do exhibit a hump around 500 to 700 Hz, which so far hasn't shown itself as being anything but a slight tonal flavor than something obviously wrong or distracting. Things have softened up here and moved in a big step away from being shrill or piercing to being well extended, detailed, and almost airy. I'm almost tempted to say the treble, combined with the imaging and transients, is the highlight of this headphone. Overall, with these aftermarket pads, it has become a decent compromise between being an ultimate imaging tool for video gaming and a vehicle for musical enjoyment, or at the very least, for the most discerning audiophiles, tolerable music playback. As things stand with the original pads, there is a very compelling argument to be made here regarding its performance purely as a gaming headphone. While gaming, the lack of perfect tonality is quite frankly insignificant considering the actual competitive gains that can be had and the imaging ability of this headphone, which at least for my head or personal HRTF, is one of the very best I've ever experienced. If I was a competitive gamer, alas my reflexes aren't quite what they used to be, I would give the T50RPMK4G some very serious consideration and simply have a look on the market to see which is cheaper, the regular Mark IV or the Mark IV-G. In any case, I hope this is a new positive direction for Fostex where they can play to their strengths and perhaps even branch out into a series of serious gaming-oriented headsets, something the Mark IV-G marketing at least seems to be strongly suggesting. All they need to do is develop an earpad that doesn't suck, something they haven't been able to achieve for over a decade. That's it for now, take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.